It was a gray Tuesday afternoon in October 1993, and Kurt Cobain was driving through Aberdeen, Washington, with no particular destination. He hadn't been back in years. Not because he hated the town, though people assumed that. It was more complicated than hate. Aberdeen was the kind of place that got inside your bones and stayed there, whether you wanted it to or not. The smell of rain on pine, the low sky that never quite lifted, the feeling that the world ended somewhere past the Chehalis River and nobody had bothered to tell anyone. Courtney was in Los Angeles. Frances was with her. Kurt had told people he needed a few days to work on new material, which was partially true. What was entirely true was that he needed to be somewhere that didn't know who he was, or rather, somewhere that had known who he was before any of this happened. He drove slowly. He wasn't sure what he was looking for. Then he saw it, a pawn shop on Wishka Street, Hanson's Trade and Loan, a handwritten sign in the window that said, guitars, amps, old gear, cash paid. He pulled over. Kurt had been in thousands of pawn shops. Before Nevermind, pawn shops were how you survived. You brought something in and walked out with enough cash to eat for 3 days or to cover the amp that blew out the night before a show. He knew the smell of them, that particular mixture of old wood and desperation and hope. He felt more comfortable in pawn shops than he did in most places. He pulled his hood up and walked in. The man behind the counter was in his 60s, broad shoulders, slow eyes, the unhurried manner of someone who had spent decades watching people walk through that door with their entire lives in their hands. His name, Kurt would learn later, was Walt Hanson. He'd owned the shop since 1974. Help you find something? Just looking, Kurt said. Mind if I check out the guitars? Walt gestured toward the back wall without looking up from the fishing magazine in front of him. Kurt walked to the guitar wall. There were maybe 20 instruments hanging there. A beaten Telecaster with a replaced neck, a couple of cheap acoustics, a mid-range Yamaha that had seen better decades, a Danelectro with a cracked body someone had repaired badly with wood filler. He almost didn't see it. It was hanging in the far corner, partially hidden behind a newer Fender acoustic someone had brought in recently. A small-bodied acoustic guitar, sunburst finish almost entirely worn away to bare wood on the top. The body was dented in 2 places. The nut had been replaced at some point with what looked like a piece of bone or hard plastic, cut too roughly to be professional work. The tuning pegs were mismatched. 3 original, 3 replacements that didn't quite match. Kurt's hand stopped moving. He stood completely still for a moment, the way you stand when your body understands something before your mind is caught up. Then he reached up and took it off the wall. The weight was wrong. The weight was exactly right. The neck was thinner than he remembered, or maybe his hands were bigger now. He turned it over slowly. On the back of the headstock, barely visible under years of grime, someone had scratched 2 letters into the wood with what looked like a nail or a compass point. K.C. Kurt Cobain, age 14, convinced those initials meant something, or desperate to believe they might. His hands weren't shaking. He was surprised by that. Everything inside him had gone completely still, the way a room goes still when someone says something that changes everything. That one's not for sale. Kurt looked up. Walt had come around the counter without Kurt noticing. He was standing a few feet away, arms crossed, watching Kurt hold the guitar with an expression that was half wary, half something else. It's in a pawn shop, Kurt said. I know where it is. I put it there. Walt's voice wasn't unfriendly, just final. That one stays. Why? Walt looked at the guitar in Kurt's hands, then at Kurt, with the careful evaluation of a man who had spent his life reading the people who walked through his door. Because it's got history, Walt said. Kids sold it to me back in '86 or '87. Can't remember exactly. Real young, maybe 15, 16. Needed money for something. He'd modified it himself, look. Walt pointed to the inside of the sound hole without touching the guitar. He'd glued a piece of foam in there to change the resonance. Didn't really work, but you could tell he'd been thinking about it, trying to figure out how to make something better out of what he had. Kurt said nothing. Bought a few things from that kid over the years, Walt continued. He'd come in with something, get a few dollars, come back a month later and try to buy it back when he had money again. Never had enough. You know how it goes. He paused. Those initials on the headstock. KC Kid said his name was Kurt. Didn't tell me his last name. Didn't need to. Walt looked at Kurt steadily. This guitar belonged to somebody who wanted to be somebody. I don't sell those. A long silence opened between them. Outside, rain had started. It moved across the window in thin sheets, the way Aberdeen rain always moved, patient and inevitable. Can I play it? Kurt asked. Walt considered that for a moment. Then he nodded once and walked back to the counter. Kurt sat down on a wooden stool near the guitar wall. He adjusted the guitar across his lap, muscle memory taking over in ways he hadn't expected. The action was high. It had always been high. He'd never been able to fix it properly. The strings were old, probably the strings that had been on it when whoever had brought it in last had left it here, which meant they'd been on it for years. They felt rough under his fingers. He played a chord. The guitar was badly out of tune. He tuned it, slowly by ear the way he'd learned to do before he'd ever owned a tuner. The rain kept coming. Walt turned a page of his magazine and didn't look up. When the guitar was in tune, or close enough, Kurt sat with it for a moment without playing anything. He was thinking about the bedroom on East 2nd Street, the water-stained ceiling, the way sound traveled differently in rooms with low ceilings and old carpet. He was thinking about the specific quality of silence that came after his parents stopped fighting, which was worse than the fighting itself because you never knew what it meant. He was thinking about how a guitar was the one thing that had made sense when everything else was noise. Then he began to play. He didn't play anything that existed. He played the way he'd played in that bedroom, quietly following something with no name, the way you follow a thread in a dark room hoping it leads somewhere. His right hand moved slowly across the strings. The worn-down guitar had a particular sound, dry and close and honest, the sound of an instrument that had never been treated gently, but had survived anyway. After a few minutes, something shifted in the playing. It was barely perceptible. A melody surfaced the way things surface in dreams, already familiar, already half gone. His voice came in low, barely above speaking, not performing, just following the sound. Walt stopped turning pages. He didn't look up, but he stopped. Kurt played for maybe 10 minutes. When he stopped, the rain was still there, patient as ever. He sat for a moment with his hands resting on the guitar body, feeling the vibration die away. How much did you pay for it? He asked. $20, Walt said. Back in '86. Kurt nodded slowly. I sold it to you for $20. A long pause. The clock on the wall clicked through 4 seconds. Walt looked up from the magazine. He looked at Kurt, really looked, the way he should have looked the moment Kurt had walked through the door but hadn't, because no one expected people like that to just walk into places like this. Son of a bitch, Walt said quietly, not angry, not excited, just a man recalibrating. I needed money for a bus ticket, Kurt said. Somewhere. I don't remember where I was going. I don't think I was going anywhere specific. I just needed to be going. Walt closed the magazine. You're Kurt Cobain. I'm Kurt Cobain, he said. The way he said it, it was hard to tell if that was something he was confirming or something he was trying to understand. Walt came around the counter and sat down on a second stool, the kind of unhurried movement that said he'd been in 100 conversations like this, which he hadn't, but the manner was the same. He looked at the guitar in Kurt's hands with a different kind of attention now. I've still got the ticket from when you sold it, he said. I keep records on everything. You signed it. Printed your name, kind of. Bad handwriting. It hasn't gotten better, Kurt said. I looked at that guitar a lot of times over the year, Walt said. Thought about selling it. Never did. Didn't know why. He paused. I knew you a little. Not personally. You were around. People talked. Kid who played music. Family had some trouble. Moved around a lot. He stopped, careful about what he was saying and what he wasn't. Aberdeen's small. People notice. Kurt was quiet for a moment. His thumb moved slowly over the worn surface of the guitar body, over the dents and the scratches, over the places where the finish had been worn down to raw wood by years of playing. I used to practice until my fingers cracked, he said. This guitar. He looked down at it. I couldn't afford strings most of the time, so I'd use the same set until they broke, and then I'd replace just the one string if I could. The G string is different from the rest. I don't know if it's the same G string, but it's a different gauge. You can feel it. He put his finger on it. Walt leaned forward slightly without thinking. I modified the nut myself because the action was too high, and I didn't know what I was doing, so I made it worse. I put the foam in the body because I read somewhere that it would change the resonance. It didn't, or it did, but not better. He turned the guitar over. I carved those initials because I was 14, and I thought that if I put my name on something, it made it real. It made me real. Walt said nothing. He was listening the way people listen when they understand that what they're hearing matters. I've got guitars now that cost more than this house, Kurt said. The words weren't boastful. They sounded almost confused, as if he himself couldn't entirely account for how that had happened. Custom stuff, vintage Martins, Mustangs, Jaguars. I've got guitars that people would... He stopped. He looked down at the guitar in his lap. I've been trying to write, he said. New stuff. And I can't. He said it simply, the way you say something that's been true for a long time. I sit down and everything sounds like something I've already done or something I'm trying to avoid doing. It sounds like Kurt Cobain. He paused. I don't know when that started happening, when it started sounding like a thing instead of just sounding. Walt was quiet for a long moment. Outside, the rain came harder for a few seconds, then settled back to its usual patience. What do you want to do with it? Walt asked. And the guitar. I want to buy it back. It's not for sale. Kurt looked at him. Not for the reason you think, Walt said. I'm not holding it for value. I'm not going to auction it or put it in a case somewhere. He looked at the guitar steadily. I kept it because it felt wrong to sell it. Felt like it was waiting for something. He stood up slowly. If you're the something it was waiting for, then I'm not selling it. I'm giving it back. I can't let you do that. You don't have a lot of say in it. Walt walked back to the counter and opened a drawer. He came back with a faded receipt, a carbon copy on thin yellow paper, and held it out. $20 in 1986. Consider it a long-term loan. Kurt took the receipt. He looked at his own handwriting from 7 years ago. The way he'd printed his name, careful and uncertain, like someone practicing a signature they weren't sure would ever matter. I don't know, Kurt said. What I'm going to do with it. I don't know if it'll help. You played it for 10 minutes, Walt said. You didn't play Kurt Cobain. You just played. Kurt drove out of Aberdeen with the guitar in the back seat, wrapped in an old blanket Walt had found in the back room. The rain followed him most of the way up the highway before it finally gave up. He didn't tell anyone about the guitar for a long time. It showed up in the house in Seattle, propped in a corner of the room where he went when he needed to be somewhere quiet. Frances Bean, barely a year old, would look at it sometimes when he brought her into that room, reaching toward it the way children reach toward things that make sound. He played it alone, late at night, mostly. Not performing, not producing, just following whatever the old dry strings offered, the way you follow something in a dark room. 3 months after he found the guitar, he wrote a song that didn't sound like anything he'd written before. Quieter, more open. He couldn't tell if it was good. He played it for Chris one afternoon, and Chris listened to the whole thing without saying anything, and then said, "Where did that come from?" Kurt thought about Walt and the rain and the back of the headstock. Aberdeen, he said. Walt Hansen didn't tell the story for a long time. He told it once to his son, the Christmas after Kurt died in April 1994. They were sitting in the shop after closing, and his son had asked about the framed receipt on the wall, the one with the bad handwriting and the yellow paper. Walt told the whole story, start to finish, the rain and the guitar, and the 10 minutes of playing that had made him stop turning pages. He could have been anyone walking through that door, Walt said. He looked like anyone. But when he picked that guitar up, something happened in this room. Something changed. I don't know how to say it better than that. His son asked what the playing had sounded like. Walt thought about it for a long moment. It sounded like someone remembering who they were, he said, before the world got hold of them. The receipt stayed on the wall. It's still there. Below it, on a small card in Walt's handwriting, are 2 lines. KC, October 1993. He came back for it,